You don't belong here. Step away from the house before I make this worse for you. Lena's voice carried across the street, sharp and certain, as police lights flickered over the driveway. She stood there in her robe, phone raised, recording like she'd finally caught what she'd been waiting for. An officer grabbed Imani's arm and pulled it behind her back, the motion quick and rough. Her case slipped from her hand and hit the concrete with a flat crack. "Ma'am, stop resisting." "I'm not resisting," Imani said, her voice low and controlled, even as the cuffs tightened around her wrists. "Then why have we been called here 17 times?" another officer asked. Lena let out a quiet, satisfied laugh. "Because something isn't right." Imani didn't look at her. She just stood there, breathing steady. They saw a problem standing in front of her own home, and had no idea who they were putting in handcuffs. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The police lights flooded through the curtains, painting the walls in angry reds and blues. Imani Vale froze mid-motion, a framed family photo still in her hands, the bubble wrap half peeled away. Her husband Elias looked up from the box he'd been unpacking, his eyes finding hers across their new living room. "What the heck?" he whispered. Their daughter Nia appeared in the hallway, phone clutched in her hand. "Mom? Dad?" "Stay inside," Imani said, her voice calm despite the cold dread spreading through her chest. It was 5:30 in the morning. They'd been quietly unpacking since 5, trying to get a head start on the day. The doorbell rang, harsh and demanding. Elias moved toward the door, but Imani caught his arm. "Let me," she said quietly. 23 years as a prosecutor had taught her how these encounters could go sideways in seconds. She smoothed her t-shirt, took a deep breath, and opened the door. 2 officers stood on their porch, hands resting near their belts. The younger one had his thumb hooked into his vest. The older one, thick-necked with a crew cut, did the talking. "Ma'am, we received a complaint about a disturbance at this residence. Shouting, breaking glass, possible domestic situation." Imani blinked. There must be some mistake. "We've been quietly unpacking. No arguments, no broken glass." The officer's eyes moved past her, scanning what he could see of their home. "Mind if we come in and make sure everything's all right?" Before she could answer, the second officer spoke. "Sir, could you step out here, please?" He was looking at Elias, who stood a few feet behind Imani. "Is that necessary?" Imani asked, keeping her voice level. "We just told you there's no problem here." "Standard procedure, ma'am." Elias moved forward, his face expressionless as he stepped onto the porch. Imani felt her stomach knot. She knew what this was, what it always was. "How many people in the residence?" the first officer asked. "Just us and our daughter. We moved in yesterday." The officer nodded. "We'll need to speak with all parties separately." From the corner of her eye, Imani noticed movement across the street. A woman stood on her porch in a thick robe, phone pressed to her ear, watching intently. Middle-aged, heavy-set, with sharp features partially hidden behind sandy-colored hair. Even from this distance, Imani could see the woman's intense focus, the slight lean forward, the hand gripping the porch railing. The second officer had moved Elias to the edge of the porch and was questioning him in low tones. Neighbors' lights were coming on. Curtains twitched in windows up and down the block. "Sir, where were you between 5 and 5:30 this morning?" the officer asked Elias. "In my living room, unpacking boxes," Elias answered, his voice controlled but tight. "Any disagreements with your wife this morning?" "No." "Mind explaining why someone would report hearing shouting and breaking glass?" Elias's jaw clenched. "I can't explain what didn't happen." The woman across the street raised her voice suddenly, clearly intending to be heard. I just want this street to be safe. That's all any of us want. Imani felt her cheeks burn as neighbors openly stared now. Some had stepped onto their porches. A man in a bathrobe and slippers stood at his mailbox, not even pretending he wasn't watching the show. Officers, Imani said carefully, we've been homeowners for less than 24 hours. We haven't broken anything, haven't argued, haven't made any noise that would disturb neighbors. Someone is mistaken. The first officer walked through their front rooms while his partner kept Elias outside. Imani stood rigidly in the living room, watching him examine their half-unpacked life. Nia had been asked to sit on the couch and not move. "Mom," Nia whispered, "this is—" "Don't," Imani cut her off softly. "Not now." After 10 excruciating minutes, the officers conferred on the porch. The first one turned back to Imani. "Everything seems in order, ma'am. Just try to keep it down, especially during early hours." "Keep what down?" Nia asked from behind her, unable to contain herself. "We weren't—" "Thank you, officers," Imani interrupted. "We appreciate your service." As the police walked back to their cruiser, the woman across the street remained on her porch. Imani made direct eye contact with her. The woman didn't look away. Instead, her mouth curved into a small, satisfied smile before she turned and went inside her house. Elias closed the door. The three of them stood in silence as the police lights finally stopped painting their new walls. "What just happened?" Nia finally asked, her voice shaking with anger. "We got welcome to the neighborhood," Elias said flatly. Imani put her arm around her daughter's shoulders. "Let's finish unpacking the kitchen. We need coffee." But the damage was done. Something precious had been stolen from them. The simple joy of a new beginning. The excitement of making a house their own. Instead, their first morning had become a public humiliation. A clear message. You don't belong here. You are already suspects. As dawn fully broke over the neighborhood, Imani stood at the window, a cup of coffee cooling in her hands. She'd sent Elias to shower, hoping it would ease the tension in his shoulders. Nia sat at the kitchen island, furiously typing on her phone. Through a gap in the curtains, Imani could see the house across the street. The woman, she didn't even know her name yet, stood in her front window, not bothering to hide her surveillance. She was still watching, still waiting. Imani let the curtain fall closed. The morning sun had barely climbed above the rooftops when Imani stepped onto her front porch. She smoothed her navy blazer and took a deep breath of fresh air, trying to reset after the chaos of dawn. A newspaper lay at the edge of their driveway. She walked down to retrieve it, determined to reclaim some normalcy. Elias emerged from the garage with a stack of flattened moving boxes. "I'll put these out for recycling," he called, his voice deliberately cheerful. Across the street, Lena Voss appeared in her yard so quickly it seemed she'd been waiting for them to emerge. Garden shears in hand, she bent over a rose bush, though her eyes rarely left the veils. She snipped randomly, missing more thorns than she cut. Imani collected the newspaper and walked to their mailbox. She had just lifted the small metal door when the sound of tires on asphalt made her stomach clench. A patrol car, the same one from earlier, rolled slowly down the street and stopped in front of their house. "You've got to be kidding me," Elias muttered, dropping the boxes at the curb. The same officer from before stepped out, looking tired and annoyed. "Good morning again, folks," he said, approaching Imani with a hand resting on his belt. "We received a call about suspicious loitering and possible mail theft at this address." Imani blinked. "Officer, this is my house. This is my mailbox." She gestured to the newspaper in her hand. "And my newspaper." "I understand that, ma'am, but I need to check your ID to confirm residence." From across the street came Lena's voice, pitched to Carrie. It's just getting ridiculous, isn't it? People move in and trouble starts immediately. In broad daylight. She spoke to no one in particular, but her words floated clearly in the morning air. Imani's cheeks burned as she pulled her wallet from her purse. Neighbors were watching again. A woman walking her dog had stopped to stare, and an older man watering his lawn stood frozen with the hose running. "Here," Imani said, handing over her driver's license. Her hand did not shake, though it took every ounce of control to keep it steady. The officer examined it, then glanced between her face and the photo. "This address is different." "Yes, because we just moved in yesterday," Imani said, her voice clipped. "As we explained earlier this morning." Elias approached slowly, hands visible. "Officer, is there anything else you need? We're just trying to start our day." Lena's voice carried again. "I'm just concerned about maintaining our community standards and property values. Safety is important to all of us who've been here for years." The officer handed Imani's license back. "Sorry for the inconvenience, ma'am. We have to respond to all calls." "Of course," Imani said, though her jaw ached from clenching. "I understand completely." When the patrol car finally pulled away, Elias put his arm around Imani's shoulders. "Let's get breakfast," he said quietly. But breakfast was interrupted too. As they sat around their kitchen island with coffee and bagels, Nia pointed out the window. "She's taking pictures of our house." Sure enough, Lena stood at the edge of her property, with her phone raised, photographing their home, their cars, their license plates. "This is getting weird," Elias said. "This isn't weird," Imani corrected him. "This is targeted." The afternoon brought no relief. When the furniture delivery truck arrived, two black men in company uniforms carrying their new couch, another patrol car pulled up behind them. A different officer this time, responding to a report of a burglary in progress. The delivery men stood rigid beside their truck, hands visible, while Imani explained yet again that this was her home. Lena watched the entire scene unfold from behind her screen door, arms crossed over her chest. "Ma'am, we've had multiple calls to this address today," the officer said, sounding confused. "Is there some kind of dispute going on?" "No dispute," Imani said. "Just a neighbor who seems uncomfortable with our presence." When the furniture was finally delivered and the police gone again, Nia stood in the living room, filming Lena through the window. "She's smirking, Mom. She's actually smiling about this." "Stop recording through the window," Imani said. "If we're going to document, we do it right." By evening, as they sat down to a quiet dinner, the weight of the day hung over them. 3 police visits in less than 12 hours. Each call more absurd than the last, yet each requiring explanation, identification, justification for being in their own home. "This isn't random," Elias said, pushing his plate away. "She's doing this on purpose." "Of course she is," Imani replied. "She's marking territory, sending a message." "What message?" Nia asked, though they all knew the answer. "That we don't belong here," Imani said, "that our presence is suspicious by default." After dinner, Imani walked through the house, checking each lock twice. The excitement of their new home had been poisoned, replaced by a sickening vigilance. When she returned to the living room, Elias was sitting in the dark, staring out the window at Lena's house. "Come away from there," she said gently. Nia looked up from her laptop. "I've started a document. Times, dates, what happened." Imani nodded, pulling her daughter close. "Good. From now on, we document everything. Every call, every comment, every time she watches the house." She squeezed Nia's shoulder. "We write it all down, take photos when possible, save any video. We need a record." "For what?" Elias asked, finally turning from the window. Imani met his eyes in the dim light. For when we need it. Morning brought no peace. Nia Vale stepped outside just after 7, her eyes still heavy from a night of broken sleep. The street was quiet, too quiet, with only the distant murmur of Lena's television floating through an open window across the way. Document everything, her mother had said. So here she was, phone in hand, taking photos of their yard, their porch, the sidewalk in front of their house, looking for evidence of tampering, intrusion, or damage after yesterday's parade of police visits. Dew still clung to the grass. Birds called from the oak tree at the corner. It should have felt peaceful. Instead, Nia felt exposed, as if the entire street was watching through curtained windows. She moved toward their car, checking it for scratches or signs of tampering. Nothing obvious. But as she circled the vehicle, she noticed something white, tucked beneath the windshield wiper. A flyer. Nia pulled it free and felt her stomach tighten. "Protect our neighborhood," read the bold headline. Below it, "Stay alert. Report suspicious activity. If you see something, say something." The paper trembled slightly in her hand. No names were mentioned. Nothing specifically pointed to her family, but the timing made the message clear. She looked up and down the street. Every car had the same flyer tucked beneath its wipers. Every mailbox had one poking from its mouth. "Good morning," Nia jumped at the voice. Mrs. Peterson, the elderly woman from 2 doors down, was retrieving her newspaper. "I see you found one of those," Mrs. Peterson said, holding up an identical flyer. "Someone's been busy." "Do you know who distributed these?" Nia asked. The older woman glanced across the street toward Lena's house, then back to Nia. Her smile tightened. "Can't say I saw anyone, but they must be very concerned about safety." Nia took photos of the flyer and walked back inside with her evidence. At breakfast, Imani examined the paper, her face a careful mask. "Predictable," was all she said. Elias looked ready to march across the street that instant. "This is harassment, plain and simple. It's a flyer about neighborhood safety with no direct accusations," Imani countered. "It's a problem, but it's not yet legally actionable." "So we just wait for her to escalate?" Elias asked. "We document," Imani said. "We remain calm. We give her no fuel." When Imani left for work an hour later, Lena was watering flowers by her mailbox, timing her gardening perfectly. She wore pressed khakis and a polo shirt, looking nothing like the robe-clad woman who had called the police before dawn the previous day. "Good morning," Lena called with exaggerated cheer. "Heading to work already?" Imani nodded politely, but kept walking to her car. "You know," Lena continued, "city people sometimes find it hard to adjust to respectful neighborhoods like this one. We're very particular about noise and visitors." Imani paused, her back straight. "I grew up in a neighborhood very much like this one, Miss Voss." "Did you?" Lena's smile didn't reach her eyes. "How nice. Well, I'm sure you'll figure things out eventually." Imani drove away without another word, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. That evening, 2 of Imani's cousins arrived with homemade dinner and offers to help unpack. Jason and Malik had brought a casserole and extra hands for assembling bookshelves. The family gathered in the living room, voices kept deliberately low, laughter restrained. It wasn't enough. Police lights swept across the walls just after 7:30. "You've got to be kidding me," Elias muttered, going to the door before anyone could knock. This time, 2 officers stood on the porch. "We've received reports of excessive noise and possible drug activity at this address." Behind them, Lena stood at the edge of her yard, phone in hand, watching. "Drug activity?" Elias's voice strained with controlled anger. "My family is unpacking books." The officers glanced at each other, then past Elias to where Jason and Malik stood in the living room. "Who are your guests, sir?" the taller officer asked. "My wife's cousins," Elias said. "Here to help us move in. Would you like to see their identification too?" The question hung in the air, loaded with everything unspoken. "That won't be necessary," the officer finally said. "Just keep the noise down." After they left, silence filled the house. Malik placed a hand on Elias's shoulder. "Man, this is ridiculous." "I'm sorry," Imani said, looking between her cousins. "I didn't mean for you to get caught in this." "Don't apologize," Jason said. "It's not you making those calls." They finished the bookshelves in tense quiet, ate dinner without their usual banter, and said goodbyes on the porch with careful glances toward Lena's house. Later, Imani walked down to the corner where Mrs. Peterson and Mr. Franklin, an older man from across the street, were chatting. Both neighbors stiffened as she approached. "Good evening," Imani offered. "Evening, Mr." Franklin replied, his eyes not quite meeting hers. "Getting settled in all right?" "We're trying," Imani said, "though we've had some misunderstandings with the neighbor across from us." Mrs. Peterson clutched her sweater tighter. "Lena's lived here 20 years. She watches out for things." "I'm sure she does," Imani said carefully. The conversation died quickly, their polite smiles never warming. As she walked away, Imani could feel their eyes on her back. Lena's influence had already taken root. Back at the house, Elias was closing blinds for the night, while Nia finished documenting the day's events. "Mom," Nia called suddenly from the front window. "Come look at this." Across the street, a small red light blinked from beneath Lena's porch overhang. A new security camera, its lens pointed directly at their front door. "She's recording us now," Elias said, his voice low. "Watching every move we make." Imani stared at the small red eye across the dark street, feeling a chill despite the warm evening. "Let her watch," she said finally. "Let her record. Everything she does just builds our case." But as they retreated inside and locked the door, the blinking red light remained, a constant reminder that their home was now under hostile surveillance. Imani measured coffee grounds with precise movements, her hands steady despite the fatigue that weighed on her shoulders. 3 days. They had lived in this house for only 3 days, and already it felt like a battlefield. "That's 9 calls in 72 hours, Elias said, leaning against the kitchen counter. His voice was low, controlled, but the tension in his jaw betrayed his anger. 9 times we've had to explain ourselves to police. In our own home." Imani poured water into the coffee maker and pressed the button, watching the dark liquid begin to drip. "I know. First it was a domestic disturbance that never happened. Then suspicious loitering at our own mailbox. Burglary when the delivery guys came. Drug activity when your cousins visited." Elias ticked each false report off on his fingers. Noise complaints during a quiet dinner. Trespassing on our own lawn. "What's next?" Through the kitchen window, the small red eye of Lena's camera pivoted slowly, tracking movement in their front yard. Watching. Always watching. "We document everything," Imani said, repeating what had become their mantra. "We stay calm. We follow the law. And meanwhile, she turns our lives into a circus," Elias muttered. Nia padded into the kitchen, her eyes still heavy with sleep. "Morning," she mumbled, reaching for a mug. "What's the battle plan for today?" "Same as yesterday," Imani said. "Keep your head up. Keep your phone charged. Record everything." The morning calm lasted exactly 43 minutes. Elias had barely stepped onto the lawn with the garden hose when the first patrol car pulled up. An officer, young, fidgeting with his notepad, approached with obvious reluctance. "Sir, "We received a call about someone suspicious damaging property," he said, glancing at Elias and the hose in his hand. "I'm watering my grass," Elias said flatly. Across the street, Lena stood on her porch, arms crossed, watching the interaction with visible satisfaction. The officer nodded, embarrassed. "Sorry to bother you, sir." 2 hours later, as Nia prepared to leave for a job interview, another cruiser appeared. Different officer, same routine. "Ma'am, we've had a report of an abandoned vehicle," he said, gesturing toward Nia's perfectly functional Honda. "I drive it every day," Nia said, showing her keys. "I was just getting in it." The officer glanced toward Lena's house, where the curtain fell quickly back into place. "Understood. Have a nice day." By noon, the UPS driver delivering Imani's office supplies was stopped at the curb and questioned about suspicious activity before he could even ring the doorbell. The young man's hands shook as he handed Imani her package. "This happens a lot around here?" he asked quietly. "Only to certain people," Imani replied. At 3 o'clock, when Imani walked to the edge of her yard to check the mail, blue lights flashed again. This time, the accusation was trespassing. "She was on my property line," Lena shouted from her driveway, "looking at my garage." "Ma'am, I was at my mailbox," Imani said to the officer, her voice level despite the humiliation burning in her chest. Behind her, neighbors paused their gardening to watch. Children on bikes slowed to stare. The officer looked exhausted. "Ms. Voss, this is the 4th call today from this address." At 5:30, as the Vales sat on their back patio trying to find a moment's peace, an unmarked police vehicle pulled into their driveway. A man in a crisp uniform with lieutenant's bars stepped out and approached the house. Elias tensed. "What now?" But the officer didn't come to their door. Instead, he crossed the street directly to Lena's house. Through the open window, they could hear his stern voice. "Ms. Voss, I'm Lieutenant Grayson. We need to discuss your pattern of emergency calls." For 15 minutes, they watched as the lieutenant spoke to Lena on her porch. Her face flushed red, then pale. Her hands fluttered in protest, then dropped. For the first time since they'd moved in, she looked genuinely rattled. When the lieutenant left, Lena slammed her door shut and disappeared inside. "Maybe that's it," Elias said cautiously. "Maybe someone finally called her on her behavior." "Let's hope," Imani said. But the tightness in her chest didn't ease. Their relief lasted 3 hours. As dusk settled over the neighborhood, Nia spotted Lena through the living room window. She was walking slowly down the block, stopping to chat with each neighbor, her voice too low to hear but her gestures unmistakable, pointing toward the Vales' house, shaking her head, leaning in close as if sharing secrets. "She's turning them against us," Nia said, filming the scene with her phone. "Look at how they're nodding." Imani watched the performance with growing dread. The warning hadn't stopped Lena. It had only changed her tactics. "She feels cornered," Imani said quietly, "and that makes her more dangerous." When darkness fell completely, Elias went out to bring in the trash bins from the curb. He paused at the edge of the driveway, his silhouette still against the night. When he returned, his face was grim. "There's a second camera now," he said, "mounted under her eaves. This one's pointed directly at our driveway." Imani nodded slowly, understanding washing over her like cold water. She's not giving up. She's doubling down. Morning light slipped through the blinds as Imani stood before the mirror, smoothing the lapels of her navy suit. Today was the county budget meeting, her first major appearance since being sworn in as state attorney. She needed this one normal morning. "You look ready to command the room," Elias said, appearing in the doorway. Imani nodded, reaching for her case file bag. "That's the plan. Downstairs, Nia gulped coffee while checking her phone. 3 more neighborhood posts about staying vigilant. She's been busy. Not today, Imani said firmly. Today, we focus on work. Real work. The kitchen felt almost normal as they moved around each other in familiar rhythm. Nia grabbed her bag for school counseling sessions. Elias checked his watch before heading to the door. Imani reviewed her notes one final time. Outside, the street seemed unusually quiet. No neighbors watering lawns, no morning joggers. Just still. Watchful houses with curtains that moved slightly when the Vales stepped onto their porch. "I'll be home by 6, Nia called, heading toward her car, parked at the curb. Elias slid into the driver's seat of their sedan. "Ready?" Imani nodded, walking toward the passenger door. Her heels clicked on the concrete driveway. The sound echoed in the strange silence. The police cruiser rounded the corner fast, lights flashing, but sirens silent. 2 more followed. Before Imani could react, officers spilled out, hands reaching for weapons. "On the ground! Now!" the first officer shouted. "What?" Imani froze, the case bag clutched in her hands. "Hands where I can see them!" Another officer advanced, positioning himself between Imani and the house. Across the street, Lena stood on her porch, phone pressed to her ear, mouth hanging open in exaggerated horror. Neighbors began appearing on porches, drawn by the commotion. "There's been a mistake," Imani said calmly, though her heart hammered. An officer grabbed her arm, spinning her toward the car. "We received a report of a break-in. Black female attempting to force entry." "This is my house," Imani said, her voice rising despite her efforts. "That's my wife," Elias shouted, trying to exit the car. An officer blocked his door. "Stay in the vehicle, sir." Nia sprinted back from her car. "What are you doing? Stop it!" The officer twisted Imani's wrist behind her back. The case bag tumbled to the ground, papers spilling across the driveway. Her carefully prepared notes for the budget meeting scattered in the breeze. The cuffs clicked cold against her skin. In that moment, everything slowed. Imani saw it all with crystal clarity. Lena's satisfied smirk, poorly disguised as concern. Neighbors filming with their phones. Elias's face contorted with helpless rage. Nia screaming. And herself, a black woman in a tailored suit, being handcuffed in her own driveway. Deputy Pike approached with a notepad. "I need your name for the report, ma'am." Imani lifted her chin. Her voice came out precise as a blade. "State Attorney Imani Vale. Spell it correctly." The silence that followed was absolute. Deputy Pike's pen froze mid-stroke. The officers holding her arms went rigid. Even the neighborhood seemed to hold its breath. "State Attorney?" Pike repeated. "That's correct," Imani said, each word carved from ice. "Now, remove these cuffs before you compound this mistake any further." The officers exchanged panicked glances. Across the street, Lena's expression collapsed from righteous vigilance to naked fear. Her phone slipped from her fingers. The cuffs came off immediately. "Ma'am, there's been a misunderstanding," Pike stammered. "We received a credible report of a black woman breaking into her own home," Imani finished, rubbing her wrists. "I want the name of every officer present and copies of all reports filed. Today." The scene dissolved into awkward apologies and hasty retreats. Officers returned to their vehicles. Neighbors drifted back inside, whispering. Only Lena remained frozen on her porch, staring at the woman she'd tried to humiliate. The woman who now held power she hadn't anticipated. For one sweet moment, Imani savored the reversal. Then reality crashed back. The budget meeting started in 30 minutes. Her papers were scattered. Her suit was rumpled. Her dignity had been assaulted in public. "I'll drive," Elias said quietly, gathering her fallen documents. "I've got this," Imani replied, straightening her jacket. "I won't give her the satisfaction." By afternoon, the brief victory had soured. Imani sat in her office between meetings when her assistant entered with a tablet. "Ma'am, you need to see this." On the screen, heavily edited clips from Lena's security cameras played on a local community forum. The footage showed only Imani gesturing sharply and Elias appearing to block an officer. All context removed. The caption read, "State Attorney throws weight around to avoid arrest? Who watches the watchdogs?" Her phone rang. The county commissioner wanted an explanation about an anonymous ethics complaint just filed against her, claiming she had intimidated police officers using her position. The commissioner suggests you might consider a temporary step back while this is resolved, her assistant said quietly. Imani's fingers tightened around her pen until her knuckles whitened. That evening, she sat at her dining room table surrounded by case files and ethics guidelines. Elias placed a mug of tea beside her without speaking. Nia paced, furiously scrolling through neighborhood comments online. "She's winning," Nia said bitterly. "How is she winning?" Imani stared at the documents before her, seeing the battlefield with perfect clarity. This morning, she'd thought exposing her title would end Lena's campaign. Instead, it had only transformed it into something more dangerous. "She's not winning," Imani said finally. "The real war has just begun." Imani pushed aside her untouched container of Kung Pao chicken and spread a legal notepad in front of her. The dining room had transformed into a war room, with laptops open to neighborhood forums, legal statutes, and property records. A box of half-eaten pizza sat forgotten near Elias's elbow. "We document everything," Imani said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion pulling at her shoulders. "Every call, every camera angle change, every accidental encounter." Nia slammed her laptop closed. "Documentation isn't enough. We should post these videos right now. Let everyone see what she's doing." "And feed directly into her narrative that we're threatening her?" Imani shook her head. "She's already spinning this as intimidation. If we go public now, it supports her complaint." "So we just take it?" Nia's voice cracked. "We just sit here while she turns the whole neighborhood against us?" Elias's fist came down on the table, not hard enough to startle but firm enough to command attention. "I'll handle this. Tomorrow morning, I walk across that street and end this man to man." "Man to what?" Imani asked, one eyebrow raised. "She's waiting for exactly that. One angry black man on her doorstep, and she has all the confirmation she needs." Her voice softened. "Elle, you know what happens next." The room fell silent. They all knew. One heated confrontation, one neighbor with a phone camera, one more call about a threatening black male, and Elias could end up worse than handcuffed. He could end up dead. "So what's your plan?" Nia demanded. "More patience? More dignity? More of the same stuff black folks have been doing forever while nothing changes?" Imani reached across the table and gripped her daughter's hand. "We use the law. Not my office, but the law itself. We document, we build a case for harassment, illegal surveillance, and false reporting. We use the very system she thinks protects her to crush her." "And how long does that take?" Elias asked quietly. "How many more mornings with cops on our doorstep? How many more nights watching cameras track our every move?" Imani had no perfect answer. "As long as it takes to win completely." Morning arrived with harsh sunlight and the sound of a code enforcement vehicle pulling up outside. Elias watched from the kitchen window as an officer in a beige uniform walked their property line, clipboard in hand. "What now?" he muttered. The officer pointed at the children's basketball hoop they'd set up in the driveway, the recycling bin visible from the street, and a small pile of mulch delivered for weekend gardening. He made notes, took photos, and left an orange citation taped to their mailbox. Across the street, Lena stood watering her immaculate roses, a satisfied smile on her face. "Code violations," Elias reported, when Imani came downstairs dressed for work. "Basketball hoop is improperly secured. Mulch is a public eyesore. Recycling bin should be behind a fence." "Nothing coincidental about the timing," Imani observed, adjusting her earrings. As she backed out of the driveway, Lena approached an elderly couple walking their dog. Imani lowered her window just enough to hear. "Such a shame about the new neighbors," Lena said loudly. "I know we're supposed to welcome everyone, but some people bring their problems with them, don't they?" The couple nodded uncomfortably. "You'd think someone with a fancy title would understand how things work in a respectable neighborhood," Lena continued. "But titles don't change instincts, I suppose." The poison dripped from perfectly polite phrasing. Nothing explicitly racist, nothing clearly actionable, just a steady stream of implications anyone could understand. When Imani returned from work, exhausted from a day of county meetings and sideways glances from colleagues who had heard about the incident, she found Nia sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by printouts of timestamps. "She's been recording us," Nia said without looking up. "Not just filming. Narrating." "What?" "I borrowed Mr. Patterson's drone. He's the photography teacher at my school. Flew it high enough to be legal. Got this." She turned her laptop around, showing grainy footage of Lena pacing her backyard, phone to her ear. They could just make out her words. "Subject female exiting rear door at 7:42 a.m., carrying suspicious bag. Subject male appears agitated, possibly under influence. She's building a fake record," Nia said. "Like she's a cop or something." Elias joined them, his face dark with anger. "The cameras moved again. Now they're pointed at our side windows. Bedroom, kitchen, living room." Imani stood very still, absorbing this escalation. What had begun as humiliating harassment had transformed into something more calculated, more invasive. Lena wasn't just trying to make them unwelcome. She was constructing a false narrative, piece by piece, day by day. "We need blinds," Imani said finally. "Everywhere." "We need more than blinds," Elias replied. "We need this to end." That night, after installing makeshift paper coverings on every window, Imani stood in the darkened living room, checking for any remaining sightlines from outside. The street was quiet except for the faint electrical hum of surveillance equipment. She moved from window to window, testing angles, checking coverage. When she reached the front bay window, she noticed a small gap where the paper didn't quite meet the frame. Through that tiny opening, a red light blinked steadily from across the street. Despite all their efforts, one camera still had a clear view into their living room, watching, recording, waiting for any moment of vulnerability. Imani stared back at the unblinking electronic eye. Behind her, Elias and Nia moved through the kitchen, their shadows stretching across the walls of what should have been their sanctuary. In that moment, standing in her own darkened home, Imani felt the weight of invasion press against her chest. The walls themselves had become porous, penetrated by suspicious gazes and electronic surveillance. Their home, their safe place, had been transformed into a fishbowl, with Lena's hungry eyes always watching, always judging, always waiting for them to make a mistake. The next morning, after sleeping only a few hours, Nia met Imani in the kitchen with a stack of printed screenshots. Her eyes were rimmed with red, but her movements were precise as she spread the papers across the counter. "I mapped it all out," Nia said, tapping a diagram she'd drawn. 3 cameras, positioned for maximum coverage. She pointed to colored markings on each photo. The red circle shows where each camera is aimed. Imani leaned closer, coffee forgotten in her hand. This isn't random. Not even close. Nia arranged the papers in sequence. Camera 1 tracks our front door and walkway. Camera 2 covers the dining room window and driveway. Camera 3, the newest one, has a clear view into part of our backyard. Outside, Elias moved methodically along the property line, pausing at different points to check sight lines. He'd been up since dawn, measuring distances with a tape measure and making notes in a small pad. None of them are pointed at her own property, Nia continued. Not her walkway, not her garden, not her porch. Just us, from every possible angle. Imani studied the careful documentation her daughter had created. This isn't about security. This is targeted surveillance. Elias came in through the back door, his face grim. I've checked every angle. Those cameras have one purpose, to watch us. Nothing else. I've calculated the exact field of view, Nia added. Camera 3 can see into our kitchen when the blinds are open. Camera 1 captures everyone who comes to our door. And Camera 2, her voice tightened. Camera 2 is angled to see through our dining room window at night when the lights are on. Imani set down her coffee cup with careful control. This stops now. The morning sun cast long shadows across the street as Elias approached Lena's house. His steps were measured, his face composed into careful neutrality. Nia watched from their front porch, phone recording discreetly at her side. Lena emerged before he reached her walkway, arms crossed over her chest. Her smile was tight and ready. "Morning, neighbor," Elias said, keeping his voice even. "I wanted to talk about your security cameras." "My security cameras?" Lena's eyebrows rose in practiced surprise. "Yes. They're pointed directly at our home, our doors, windows, and yard." Elias kept his hands visible at his sides. "We'd appreciate it if you could adjust them to focus on your own property instead." Lena's smile didn't waver, but something cold flickered in her eyes. "I have every right to protect my home." "Of course you do," Elias agreed. "But these cameras aren't monitoring your home. According to our measurements, they're specifically angled to monitor ours." Lena's expression hardened. "Measurements? Are you surveying my property now? We're only—" "You know," Lena cut in, her voice dropping to a stage whisper. "People who have something to hide are always the ones who fear being watched." The accusation hung in the air between them. On the porch, Nia's grip tightened on her phone. "We have nothing to hide," Elias replied, his voice still calm, though tension lined his shoulders. "We just want our privacy respected." Lena's smile returned, sharp as a knife. "Privacy is earned in this neighborhood. Trust is earned. Some people think they can just buy their way in. But we know better." She turned and walked back to her door, calling over her shoulder. "The cameras stay where they are. For security." Late afternoon shadows stretched across the street when Imani pulled into the driveway. As she gathered her briefcase and files, she noticed Lena walking purposefully toward her, timing the approach perfectly. Imani stepped out of the car just as Lena reached the edge of the driveway. The older woman planted herself directly in Imani's path to the front door. "Long day enforcing the law?" Lena asked, her voice honey-sweet with venom underneath. "Excuse me," Imani said evenly, attempting to step around her. Lena shifted, maintaining the blockade. "You know, this used to be such a peaceful street. Everyone knew their place. Everyone respected the way things are done here." Imani met her gaze directly. "I need to get to my door, Ms. Voss. Some people can buy these homes, Lena continued, as if Imani hadn't spoken, her voice dropping to a near whisper. But they can never really earn the trust that matters. Titles and fancy suits don't change what people see. The words were precisely chosen. No slur, no explicit threat. Just the clear implication that no matter Imani's position or accomplishments, her blackness made her eternally suspect. Imani felt the familiar burn of rage and humiliation rise in her throat. She swallowed it back, knowing any reaction would feed directly into Lena's narrative. "Please move aside," she said, her voice steady. Lena held her position for 3 more heartbeats, then stepped away with exaggerated courtesy. "Just being neighborly." That evening, Nia sat across from Terence Bloom at the local coffee shop. The retired reporter was in his 60s with salt and pepper hair and eyes that missed nothing. "You said you recognized her name," Nia prompted, recorder ready beside her cup. Terence nodded slowly. "Not Voss. She went by Lena Mercer back then, in Parkview. About 12 years ago." "What happened?" "Church Redevelopment Committee. Big project. Lots of community donations." Terence's weathered fingers tapped the table. "Funds went missing. Nearly $90,000. Nobody could prove where it went. But she was treasurer." Nia leaned forward. "Was she charged?" Investigation started. Then, conveniently, a fire broke out in the church office. Destroyed all the financial records. His eyes narrowed at the memory. "Ruled accidental, but my sources said otherwise." And then, disappeared overnight. Divorce followed. Name change. Then she shows up here as Lena Voss, pillar of the community. He shook his head. Some people have powerful friends who make problems go away. At midnight, Imani sat alone at the dining room table, blinds tightly closed against watching eyes. Terence's hastily scribbled notes lay spread before her, illuminated by a single lamp. She read each line again, connecting scattered details into a pattern. Lena Mercer, now Voss. Treasurer of a church-building fund. Missing money. Convenient fire. Hasty departure. The pieces fit together into something darker than simple bigotry. This wasn't just a racist neighbor who resented their presence. This was a woman who had spent years crafting a false identity, hiding behind performative victimhood and community concern. A woman with secrets. A woman desperate to control her environment. A woman who would call the police 17 times on innocent neighbors because control was everything to her. Imani gathered the notes together, mind racing with implications. Lena wasn't just harassing them because they were black. She was attacking them because Imani, a state attorney with investigative resources and legal power, represented a different kind of threat entirely. The following evening, Imani stood at her front window, watching the sunset paint Lena's white house in shades of orange. The cameras mounted on the porch columns were dark silhouettes against the fading light, their lenses still trained on the Vale home like unblinking eyes. "Are you sure about this?" Elias asked, his voice tight with concern. "Yes," Imani said, smoothing her blouse. "No threats, no anger. Just clarity." Nia adjusted her phone in her pocket. "I've got the voice recorder running, just in case." Imani nodded and stepped outside. The evening air was heavy with summer heat as she crossed the street with measured steps. Behind her, Elias and Nia stood on their own porch, watching. Neighbors' curtains twitched in nearby windows. Lena's door opened before Imani reached the steps. The older woman stood in the doorway, arms crossed, a plastic smile fixed on her face. "Well," Lena said, her voice sticky with false warmth, What a surprise. We need to talk, Imani said, keeping her voice steady. Lena's smile didn't waver as she stepped aside. Of course. Neighbors should talk more. Imani remained on the porch, refusing the invitation inside. Better to stay in view of witnesses. The calls need to stop, Lena. The cameras pointing into our home need to be redirected. This harassment ends now. Lena's face transformed into a mask of wounded innocence. Harassment? I'm just concerned about unusual activity. Anyone would be. 17 calls to the police in 10 days is not concern. It's harassment. Maybe where you come from, that's how it seems. Lena's voice dropped, her smile fading into something colder. I actually feel sorry for women like you. Imani didn't respond to the bait. All that education, all those fancy titles, Lena continued, her eyes narrowing, makes you forget what people see first, when they look at you. The words landed like a slap. Imani felt heat rise in her face, but kept her expression neutral. This street was peaceful before your family arrived, Lena said, gesturing toward the quiet homes around them. Everyone got along. Everyone understood the standards. We've broken no laws, violated no standards, Imani said evenly. But you have. False reports, illegal surveillance, trespassing. Trespassing? Lena laughed. You can't prove that. We're documenting everything. Something flickered in Lena's eyes, a momentary uncertainty, before she leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. Let me tell you something you should understand by now. Men with badges have always believed me first. Her lips curved into a thin smile. And they always will. The statement hung in the air between them, exposing the entire strategy more clearly than any shouted slur could have done. Lena was weaponizing her whiteness, knowing the system would default to believing her. That may have worked for you before, Imani said, her voice cool. It won't now. No one wants a black prosecutor bringing drama onto a nice block, Lena replied, emphasizing the word black just enough to make her meaning clear. People move away from that sort of thing. Property values fall. The only person causing problems here is you. Prove it, Lena challenged, the mask of politeness completely gone now. We will, Imani promised. As she turned to leave, Imani noticed a patch of fresh concrete near the side path leading to Lena's backyard. It was roughly 3 feet square, still slightly darker than the surrounding walkway. Her eyes followed the path to an old detached garage with peeling paint and a shiny new lockbox mounted beside its door. The contrast between the weathered building and the new security measure felt wrong, like the fresh concrete. Recent changes that didn't fit with Lena's otherwise meticulous maintenance of her visible property. Imani filed the details away as she walked back across the street, feeling Lena's eyes boring into her back with each step. Elias met her halfway. You okay? Fine, Imani said, though the confrontation had left her shaken in ways she wouldn't admit aloud. Inside their home, with the blinds drawn against the watching cameras, Nia was waiting with her laptop open. Mom, look at this, she said, excitement threading through her voice. Mrs. Jacobson, 2 doors down, has a doorbell camera. She let me review the footage from last week when those flyers started appearing. She turned the screen, showing grainy but clear footage of a heavy-set figure moving up the street in early morning darkness, placing papers on cars and in mailboxes. It's her, Elias said, leaning closer. That's Lena. Nia nodded eagerly. And look at this. She advanced the footage to show Lena returning to her house, then immediately making a phone call while staring directly at the Vale home. She called the police right after distributing the flyers, Imani said, the pieces clicking together. She manufactured both the warning and the complaint. We've got her, Nia said, her eyes bright with vindication. For the first time since the blue lights had first flooded their windows at dawn, the Vales felt a surge of hope. The evidence was tangible now, not just their word against Lena's, but recorded proof that she had deliberately staged at least part of her harassment campaign. "It's a start," Imani said, allowing herself a small, fierce smile. "Now we build the case." Later, as they prepared for bed, the house felt different. Still under surveillance, still targeted, but no longer defenseless. With each piece of evidence they gathered, Lena's carefully constructed facade cracked a little more. Elias closed the bedroom blinds against the red lights of Lena's cameras and turned to Imani. "Do you think it'll be enough?" "Not yet," she said, thinking of the fresh concrete and that odd lockbox. "But we're getting closer, and she's getting careless." The next morning, the Vale family moved with renewed purpose. Imani rose before the sun, pulling her robe tight as she headed downstairs to start the coffee maker. By the time Elias and Nia joined her, the dining room table had already transformed into a makeshift command center. Laptops open, legal pads arranged in neat stacks, and printed screenshots spread across the polished wood surface. "Got the footage backed up in 3 different places," Nia said, setting down her mug and tapping at her keyboard. "Cloud storage, external drive, and I sent copies to my work email just in case." Elias leaned over her shoulder, squinting at the screen. "Can you zoom in there? I want to see her face clearly when she's putting those flyers on the Martinez's car." The video wasn't high definition, but it captured Lena's distinctive shape, moving purposefully up the street in the pre-dawn hours, methodically placing papers under windshield wipers and stuffing them into mailboxes. The timestamp showed 5:17 a.m. "And here," Nia said, switching to another clip, "is her making the call immediately afterward." The footage showed Lena returning to her porch, phone pressed to her ear, her gaze fixed directly on the Vale house. Imani nodded, her expression tight with controlled satisfaction. This connects the harassment campaign directly to the false police reports. It shows intent and pattern. "I sent everything to Martin Chen at the privacy law firm," Elias said. "He called back this morning. Says those camera angles are definitely unlawful. They're not protecting her property. They're surveilling ours. Specific windows, entryways, private areas of the yard." "Good," Imani said, careful to separate her professional role from their personal response. "I've forwarded what we have through private channels to the county attorney's office, recusing myself from any involvement, and I've retained outside counsel to handle our civil action." Naya printed another page and added it to a growing folder. "We're looking at harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, unlawful surveillance, false reporting, and trespass," Elias added, "if we can prove she's been on our property." By early afternoon, their efforts began showing first results. Officer Ramirez, who had responded to 3 of Lena's calls, stopped by ostensibly to follow up on previous complaints. Once inside, his demeanor changed. "Off the record," he said quietly, glancing toward the windows, "Dispatch has flagged Ms. Voss as a pattern caller. Her reports are now coded for verification before full response." Imani nodded, careful not to appear as if she'd influenced the department's procedures. "We appreciate the professionalism of your officers throughout this situation." After Ramirez left, a tentative knock came at their front door. Sarah Weinstein from next door stood on the porch, twisting her hands nervously. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," she said, not quite meeting Imani's eyes, "for believing, well, for not speaking up sooner. Those flyers, the way she talks about you all, it wasn't right." Elias joined Imani at the door. "Thank you for that," he said. his shoulders relaxing slightly for the first time in days. As the afternoon wore on, small signals suggested the neighborhood's quiet alignment was shifting. Mr. Peterson nodded as Nia retrieved the mail. The Collins family waved from their driveway instead of hurrying inside. The street felt less hostile, as if Lena's carefully constructed narrative was beginning to unravel. Even Imani, typically guarded in her optimism, allowed herself to imagine the harassment campaign might collapse under the weight of its own lies. "Maybe seeing the evidence will be enough," she said, as they prepared dinner. But Lena Voss had built her life around controlling perceptions. By dusk, she sensed her grip on the narrative slipping. Her response was immediate and theatrical. Standing on her front porch in a bathrobe, despite the mild evening temperature, she began shouting loud enough for the entire block to hear. "They're trying to silence me." Her voice cracked with manufactured terror. "I'm just a scared woman living alone. All I did was try to protect our homes." Neighbors emerged from doorways and garages, drawn by the commotion. Lena's performance continued, complete with trembling hands and tears that appeared on command. "They've got connections. They're using the system against me because I spoke up." She pressed a tissue to her eyes, her body heaving with exaggerated sobs. From their window, the Vales watched the display with disgust. "It's so obviously fake," Nia muttered. Yet on the street, the reaction remained mixed. Some neighbors shook their heads and returned inside, clearly seeing through the act. Others hesitated, unwilling to choose sides openly. A few moved closer to Lena's yard, offering uncomfortable pats on her shoulder. "This is her countermove," Imani said quietly. "She's trying to reframe everything as persecution." That night, as the house settled into uneasy quiet, Nia sat at her bedroom window, scanning footage from a small camera they'd installed near their back fence. Just before midnight, the motion sensor activated. She leaned forward, watching as a shadowy figure moved along the perimeter of their property, pausing near the gate. The form was bulky, distinctive, unmistakably Lena's silhouette in the darkness. Nia held her breath as the figure stood motionless for nearly a minute before slipping away into the night. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows as Nia sat cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by stacks of printed photos, screenshots, and legal documents. After the shadowy figure at their fence last night, no one had slept well. Her mother had left for an unavoidable meeting at the courthouse, and her father had run to the hardware store for additional security cameras. "I'll be back in 20 minutes, Elias had promised, squeezing her shoulder. Nia organized their evidence meticulously. 17 documented police calls, time-stamped footage of Lena's surveillance cameras tracking their movements, the flyers with their thinly veiled threats. She backed up photos to 3 different cloud accounts, refusing to risk losing a single piece of evidence. The house was quiet, except for the soft clicking of her laptop keyboard. Then came a sound that didn't belong, a faint scraping from the hallway. Nia froze. Maybe the house was settling. She held her breath and listened. Another sound, deliberate this time. A drawer sliding open. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she rose slowly to her feet. "Dad," she called out, knowing he couldn't possibly be back yet. No answer. She moved cautiously toward the hallway, phone clutched in her hand. As she rounded the corner, she stopped cold. Lena Voss stood in their home office, rifling through a file box. One drawer of the desk hung open. Papers were scattered across the surface. "What the hell are you doing in our house?" Nia demanded, her voice shaking with fury. Lena spun around, momentarily startled, but her shock quickly hardened into something calculating. "The door was open," she lied. "I heard noises. I thought someone was breaking in." Nia glanced toward the kitchen. The back door stood slightly ajar, the door she'd failed to fully latch after bringing in groceries earlier. A horrible realization washed over her. She had given Lena the opening she needed. "Get out now," Nia ordered, raising her phone. "I'm calling the police." Lena's face transformed instantly. She lunged forward with unexpected speed, shoving Nia hard against the doorframe. Pain exploded across Nia's back as Lena grabbed for her phone. "Give me that," Lena hissed, her friendly neighbor act completely abandoned. Nia twisted away, but Lena was stronger than she looked. They crashed into the hallway table. A vase toppled and shattered across the hardwood floor. "Get off me!" Nia shouted, struggling to break free. The fight was nothing like movie battles with their choreographed moves and dramatic punches. This was ugly, desperate, and terrifying, all grunting breaths and clawing hands. Lena's nails raked across Nia's arm. Nia's elbow connected with Lena's chest. They stumbled into the dining room, knocking chairs over. Lena grabbed a handful of Nia's hair and yanked backward. Pain shot through Nia's scalp. She cried out, twisting to break the grip. In the struggle, her phone clattered across the floor. Lena dove for it, but Nia tackled her from behind. They crashed into the coffee table. Glass cracked beneath them. The front door burst open. Elias stood there, grocery bags dropping from his hands. "Dad!" Nia gasped. Everything happened at once. Elias rushed forward, pulling Nia away from Lena's grasp. Relief flooded through her as her father's strong hands separated them. But Lena wasn't finished. With theatrical precision, she slammed her own shoulder into the wall, then raked her nails across her own cheek, drawing thin lines of blood. "Help!" she screamed, her voice pitched to Carrie. "They're attacking me! Someone help!" Elias stood paralyzed, his face a mask of disbelief as he held Nia protectively. Lena staggered toward the front door, suddenly transformed into a terrified victim. "Police!" she shrieked. "I was just checking on a neighbor, and they attacked me." Outside, doors opened. Neighbors emerged onto porches and lawns, drawn by the commotion. Lena collapsed dramatically onto the grass, sobbing and pointing back at the house. By the time police cruisers arrived, a small crowd had gathered. Lena sat surrounded by concerned neighbors, weeping her story of innocence and assault. Blood from her self-inflicted scratches provided visual evidence to her claims. Inside, Nia trembled with rage and shock. "She broke in," she told the officers. "She was going through our files. She attacked me first." But in the yard, Lena's performance continued. "I was just being neighborly," she wailed. "They're trying to destroy me because I reported suspicious activity." 2 hours later, with statements taken and evidence collected, the damage was clear. The house stood in shambles, broken glass, overturned furniture, scattered documents. But the real devastation came when Imani returned home to find a county official waiting alongside the police. "Mrs. Vale," the man said stiffly, "given the ethics complaint already pending and the sensitive nature of today's incident, the county strongly recommends you maintain complete distance from this case." His meaning was unmistakable. Pursue this, and your career is at risk. That night, the family sat in their wrecked living room. Nia held an ice pack to her bruised shoulder. Elias paced between broken furniture. Imani sat perfectly still, her face a mask of controlled fury. "She planned this," Imani said finally. "She was looking for something to use against us. And I gave her the opening," Nia whispered, shame washing over her. "I didn't check the door." "This isn't your fault," Elias said firmly. But the truth hung heavily between them. Lena had pushed them to the edge of ruin, and the system that should protect them now tied their hands instead. Midnight came and went. yet sleep remained impossible. The Vale family sat amid the wreckage of their living room, broken glass still scattered across the floor, furniture upended, and yellow evidence markers dotting the space like ugly flowers. The police had finally left after hours of questioning, but their presence lingered in the air. Imani sat perfectly straight on the edge of the couch, her navy suit wrinkled, but her posture unyielding. Elias paced between the kitchen and living room, unable to settle. Nia sat cross-legged on the floor, sorting through scattered papers that Lena had rifled through during her invasion. She was looking for something specific, Nia said, her voice hoarse from explaining the attack over and over to different officers. The way she went straight for the files, the documents. Elias stopped pacing. What could she possibly think we have on her? We just moved in. Imani rubbed her temples. It's not what we have. It's what she thinks we might discover. Nia stood suddenly, wincing at the soreness in her shoulder where she'd hit the table during the struggle. She reached into her jeans pocket and pulled out something metal that jingled in the quiet room. "I forgot about these," she said, staring down at her palm. "They fell during the fight." Elias moved closer. "What is it?" "Lena's keys. She dropped them when she lunged at me." Nia spread the key ring on the coffee table. 5 keys lay there, 3 modern, 1 for a padlock, and 1 that looked distinctly different from the others. It was brass, heavily worn, with an old-fashioned cut and an unusual triangular head. Imani leaned forward. "That doesn't look like a house key." Nia picked up the odd key, turning it in the light. "Remember what Terrence said about a church redevelopment scandal? About missing records?" Without hesitation, Nia reached for her phone and dialed. Midnight had long passed, but to her surprise, Terrence answered on the 3rd ring. "Terrence, I'm sorry for calling so late," she began. "I heard about what happened," he interrupted. "The whole neighborhood's talking." 30 minutes later, Terrence Bloom arrived at their door, looking rumpled but alert. His eyes widened at the destruction, but he asked no questions about it. Instead, he examined the key that Nia placed in his palm. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered, turning it over. "This looks like an old storage facility key. There used to be a place called Safe Hold Storage on the county line." He glanced up. The church committee rented several units there during the redevelopment project. Imani's expression remained neutral, but her eyes sharpened. "You're certain?" "I covered that story for months before it died," Terrence replied. "Records kept disappearing. Then the fire happened. Convenient timing." Elias crossed his arms. "What fire?" "Small blaze at the church office. Nothing major, but just enough to destroy financial records, donation logs, expense reports." Terrence shook his head. "Never proven to be arson, but—" "And Lena was involved?" Imani asked. She went by Lena Mercer back then, treasurer of the committee. After everything quieted down, she married a man named Voss and moved here. Terrence's mouth tightened. "I always knew something wasn't right." They worked through the night. While Elias cleared broken glass and righted furniture, Terrence and Nia hunted through online property archives. Imani made calls to trusted colleagues, not using her office directly, but ensuring everything remained above board. By 4 in the morning, they had assembled a timeline. The Church Redevelopment Committee had dissolved 9 years ago after $183,000 in donations couldn't be accounted for. The case stalled when records burned, and witnesses suddenly stopped cooperating. The storage units, rented under the committee's name, continued to be paid for through an automatic withdrawal for almost 2 years after the committee disbanded. "The account was never closed," Terrence said, pointing to the records. "Someone kept that unit accessible." And Lena still has the key, Naya added. Dawn broke through the windows, painting the damaged room in soft golden light. Imani stood, stretching muscles stiff from hours of concentration. Her face showed the first hint of something beyond controlled anger, a spark of determined clarity. I won't use this as leverage, she said firmly. That's exactly what she would do. But, Nia began. No. Imani's voice was gentle but firm. We do this correctly. I'll prepare a referral to the Financial Crimes Unit. They're independent of my office. I'll disclose the key, how we found it, and my limited involvement. Everything transparent. And if they do nothing? Elias asked, the frustration clear in his voice. They will, Imani replied. Because unlike before, this time there's physical evidence and someone willing to keep pushing. She nodded toward Terence, who straightened his shoulders in response. Imani gathered the copies they'd made and slipped them into a folder. She would hand everything to outside counsel as soon as business hours began. Get some sleep, she told Nia and Elias. All of you. But sleep seemed impossible. Instead, they continued working as the sun rose fully, casting away the shadows that had filled the room during their night of discovery. As Imani prepared to leave with the documents, she paused at the door and looked back at her family. We finish this in the light, she said, her voice steady with newfound resolve. The morning sun strengthened as Imani prepared for work. Her navy suit felt like armor today, protection against the whispers and sideways glances she'd face at the county building. The ethics complaint hung over her like a cloud, but now she had something solid to grasp. I've called a locksmith, Elias said, examining the damaged back door frame where Lena had forced her way in. Should be here in an hour. Imani nodded, checking her watch. I've got the civil attorney meeting me at lunch. The police report from last night helps our case. Nia appeared in the doorway, clutching a thick binder. I'm ready. Be careful, Imani cautioned. Just facts. No accusations we can't prove. I know, Mom. Nia's voice was steady. People need to see what's been happening in black and white. As Imani drove to work, she noticed several neighbors in their yards, watching her car pass. The break-in had shifted something. The violation of their home had crossed a line even the most passive observers couldn't ignore. Elias heard the drill buzzing as the locksmith installed a reinforced lock system. Through the window, he spotted Nia talking with Mrs. Daniels, an elderly woman who lived 3 houses down. The conversation lasted longer than expected. When Nia returned, her expression was grim but satisfied. Mrs. Daniels saw Lena in our backyard 3 different nights last week, she reported. She was too scared to say anything. Why? Elias asked, though he already suspected the answer. Lena knows things about everyone. Mrs. Daniels's son had some legal trouble years ago. Lena made sure she knew that Lena knew. Blackmail, Elias muttered, shaking his head. Not directly. Just hints and reminders. Enough to keep people quiet. The locksmith finished, demonstrating the new deadbolts and reinforced strike plates. As he left, Nia spotted Mr. Walker waving from across the street. I think he wants to talk to us, she said. Mr. Walker's hands trembled slightly as he inserted a small flash drive into Nia's laptop. My security camera catches the side of your property, he explained. I've been saving these. Didn't know if I should get involved. The footage was damning. Lena approaching their side gate at dusk, testing the latch. Lena picking up a package from their porch, carrying it away, then returning it later visibly opened. Most disturbing was a clip of Lena standing in her own driveway, practicing what appeared to be distressed facial expressions before picking up her phone to make a call. That was right before police showed up claiming we had a domestic disturbance, Nia noted, checking the timestamp. Mr. Walker nodded. I should have spoken up sooner. You're speaking now, Nia said. That matters. By afternoon, Imani received the message she'd been waiting for. The Financial Crimes Unit had reviewed her referral and opened a preliminary investigation into the church redevelopment fund. They'd already contacted the storage facility about access records. They're moving fast, her civil attorney said during their lunch meeting. Once they confirmed the key actually opened the unit, things accelerated. What about our case? Imani asked. Rock solid. Harassment, trespass, assault, unlawful surveillance, false reporting, all with supporting evidence. The neighbor statements and footage seal it. Imani exhaled. File everything today. Across the street from the Vale home, Lena paced her living room. Through her window, she'd watched neighbors visiting the Vales all day. Betrayal burned in her chest. The street had been hers. She'd known everyone's weaknesses, cultivated their fears, kept them in line. Something snapped. She rushed to her front window, pounding the glass with her fists. Traitors! She screamed. After everything I've done for this neighborhood. A passing dog walker quickened their pace, avoiding eye contact. Lena's makeup was smeared, her hair disheveled. The careful mask of concerned citizen had crumbled completely. Elias watched the spectacle from their porch, where he sat with Mrs. Daniels and two other neighbors who'd come forward with statements. She's falling apart, Mrs. Daniels observed quietly. That happens when lies catch up, Elias replied. The group fell silent as a car pulled into the cul-de-sac. Not police this time, but a black sedan with county plates. A woman in a crisp suit emerged, carrying a leather document case. Process server, one neighbor whispered. They watched as the woman walked confidently up Lena's driveway, ignoring the shouting. Lena yanked open the door before the woman could knock. What do you want? Lena demanded, loud enough for everyone to hear. Lena Voss? The woman's voice was professionally neutral. You've been served. She extended the thick envelope. Lena stared at it, not moving. These are legal documents requiring your response. Refusing to accept them does not invalidate service. Lena snatched the papers, her hand shaking. The process server turned and walked back to her car, nodding briefly toward the neighbors who had witnessed the exchange. No one spoke. No one needed to. As evening settled over the street, an unfamiliar quiet descended. For weeks, tension had hung in the air like an electrical charge before a storm. Now the first lightning had struck. The neighbors dispersed silently to their homes, processing what they'd witnessed. Elias returned inside where Nia was backing up the video files. It's done, he said simply. Nia nodded. Just the beginning of done. The next morning arrived with sharp clarity. No clouds softened the sky, no breeze eased the heat. It was as if nature itself demanded a clean accounting. Imani stood before the mirror, adjusting her dark suit jacket. Her reflection showed a woman composed, but beneath that surface ran currents of exhaustion and determination. She had slept little, reviewing every document until her eyes burned. Ready? Elias asked from the doorway. His presence steadied her. Through 17 false calls, surveillance cameras pointed at their windows, flyers meant to mark them as dangerous. Through it all, he had maintained a dignity that humbled her. As I'll ever be, she answered. Nia appeared behind him, dressed in a simple blue dress, her phone and tablet in a leather portfolio. The documentation was her work, meticulous, thorough, undeniable. They can't ignore what's right in front of them, Nia said. Imani nodded. That's the plan. The courthouse steps were crowded with mourning cases. A few reporters lingered near the entrance, alerted by courthouse whispers about the state attorney appearing as a complainant. Imani kept her eyes forward, ignoring questions tossed her way. Inside, the hallway stretched long and cool, marble floors amplifying every footstep. Courtroom 4 waited at the end of the corridor, its heavy wooden doors like a boundary between chaos and order. Their attorney, Marlene Grayson, met them outside. "Full house in there," she warned. Word got around. "Let them watch," Elias said. About time people saw the truth. They entered to find the gallery already three-quarters filled. Neighbors, courthouse staff, and curious onlookers turned to watch their entrance. Imani felt their stares but refused to shrink beneath them. Across the aisle, Lena sat beside her attorney, a gray-haired man with an expensive suit and permanent frown. She wore a pale blue cardigan over a floral dress, her hair pulled back in a modest clip, the costume of harmlessness. When their eyes met, Lena's face twitched with hatred before settling back into practiced vulnerability. Judge Miranda Sloan entered, her expression giving nothing away. After preliminaries, Marlene opened with a clear statement of facts. 17 documented false reports, illegal surveillance, trespass, assault, and a coordinated campaign of harassment. "This isn't about misunderstanding," Marlene said. "It's about weaponizing systems against a family because of who they are." Lena's attorney countered with claims of neighborhood safety concerns and a woman living alone who felt threatened. "Mrs. Voss has been a pillar of this community," he insisted. Then the evidence began. First came the dispatch logs, 17 calls in 3 weeks from the same number to the same address. Officer testimony confirmed no violations were ever found at the Vale residence. Next, video footage from a neighbor's doorbell camera showed Lena placing flyers on cars, then immediately making a call while watching the Vale home. "Can you identify what you're doing in this footage?" Marlene asked when Lena took the stand. "Letting neighbors know about concerns," Lena replied, her voice soft and trembling. "And the phone call immediately after?" "I don't recall." "Dispatch records show you reported suspicious persons 3 minutes after placing these flyers. Was that coincidental timing?" Lena shifted in her seat. "I was concerned." Marlene displayed enlarged images of Lena's security cameras alongside property measurements and angles. These cameras point directly into the Vales' dining room, bedroom windows, and backyard, not at your property line or entryway. "Can you explain the security purpose?" "I had to protect myself," Lena insisted, her performance fraying slightly. The next blow came from Mrs. Daniels, who testified she'd witnessed Lena on the Vales' property multiple times before the break-in. "She wasn't delivering anything or leaving a note," Mrs. Daniels said firmly. "She was looking in windows, checking the back gate." With each piece of evidence, the courtroom's energy shifted. Sympathetic glances toward Lena turned to troubled frowns. Whispers grew behind cupped hands. When Imani took the stand, she spoke with measured precision, describing the harassment without embellishment. Facts needed no drama to land with impact. "And how did these repeated false reports affect your family?" Marlene asked. "We couldn't simply live," Imani said. "Every movement was scrutinized, reported, distorted. My husband couldn't water plants without police questioning. My daughter couldn't have friends visit without accusations of criminal activity." Lena's attorney tried undermining her credibility by suggesting she'd used her position to intimidate. "Did you ever mention your role as state attorney to influence these matters?" he asked. "Only when being physically detained on my own property," Imani replied calmly. "I recused myself from any official involvement immediately after." In her final testimony, Lena doubled down on victimhood. "I've always been honest," she insisted, voice breaking theatrically. "I've never hidden anything in my life. I just wanted safety." Judge Sloan's eyes narrowed slightly. "Mrs. Voss, Are you stating under oath that you've never concealed information relevant to your character or credibility? Never, Lena said firmly. I'm an open book. Ask anyone who knows me. The courtroom fell quiet. Imani glanced at Marlene, who nodded slightly. With calm, deliberate movements, Imani reached into her briefcase and removed a manila folder. She slid it across to Marlene, who approached the bench. Your Honor, in light of the witness's statement about her honesty, we have evidence directly contradicting that claim. These are public records regarding the defendant under her former married name, Margaret Lena Hargrove, including financial documentation from the First Community Church Redevelopment Fund investigation. Lena's face drained of color. Her attorney leaned toward her, whispering urgently. Judge Sloan accepted the folder, scanning its contents with practiced efficiency. I'll review these documents, she said. This court will recess for 30 minutes. As the gavel fell, Lena sat frozen, the carefully constructed image of innocence crumbling like sand beneath waves. The courtroom door swung open exactly 30 minutes later. Judge Sloan returned with a stack of documents in hand, her expression unreadable but her posture rigid with purpose. The gallery fell silent as she took her seat, adjusting her glasses with deliberate calm. The court will now resume, she announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. Mrs. Voss, please return to the stand. Lena rose shakily, her earlier confidence replaced by a twitchy nervousness. Her attorney whispered something urgent in her ear, but she brushed him off with a jerky nod. As she took her seat in the witness box, her eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal's. Judge Sloan shuffled the papers before her. Mrs. Voss, moments ago you testified under oath that you have never hidden anything in your life and are an open book. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor, Lena replied, her voice smaller than before. I have reviewed these documents concerning your activities under your former name, Margaret Lena Hargrove. They raise serious questions about your credibility. The judge looked up. Mrs. Vale's counsel may proceed. Marlene Fisher approached the witness stand, carrying a copy of the records. Mrs. Voss, do you currently maintain access to a storage unit registered to the First Community Church Redevelopment Committee? Lena's breathing changed instantly, shallow and quick. I don't know what you're talking about. You were treasurer of that committee 15 years ago, were you not? That was a long time ago. I barely remember. Marlene held up a key. This was found in your possession during the altercation at the Vale residence. Our investigation shows it matches the lock of Unit 477 at Pinewood Storage, still paid for monthly through an automatic withdrawal from an account you control. Lena's face flushed red. That's just an old storage space. Nothing to do with anything. From the back of the courtroom, a man in a dark suit stood up. Your Honor, if I may, I'm Special Investigator Marcus Torres with the Financial Crimes Task Force. We've verified the connection between this storage unit and missing funds from the redevelopment project. We have grounds to execute a search warrant immediately. The judge nodded. So noted, investigator. Lena's composure cracked entirely. This is ridiculous. They're trying to distract you from what they did to me. Mrs. Voss, Judge Sloan interrupted, your testimony about never concealing anything appears demonstrably false. This severely impacts your credibility regarding all other claims in this case. The attorney representing the Vales seized the momentum. Your Honor, in light of these revelations and the substantial evidence already presented, we request immediate relief for our clients. Judge Sloan nodded, scanning her notes. Based on the preponderance of evidence, this court finds that Mrs. Voss engaged in a pattern of harassment, unlawful surveillance, trespass, and false reporting against the Vale family. The court grants the protective order prohibiting Mrs. Voss from approaching within 500 feet of any Vale family member or their residence. Lena jumped to her feet. "You can't do that. It's my neighborhood." "Mrs. Voss, control yourself," the judge warned. "Additionally," Judge Sloan continued, "I am referring the criminal matters, including filing false police reports, criminal trespass, assault, and unlawful surveillance, to the district attorney's office for prosecution. The evidence of financial impropriety will be handled by the appropriate authorities." The gallery buzzed with whispers. Imani remained composed, her eyes fixed forward, while Nia squeezed her father's hand. "This hearing is adjourned." Judge Sloan's gavel came down with finality. As people rose to leave, Lena stood frozen, her face contorting with rage. Her attorney tried to guide her toward a side exit, but she shook him off violently. Outside the courthouse, reporters had gathered on the steps. Cameras flashed as the Vales emerged into the sunlight, surrounded by neighbors who had testified on their behalf. A reporter approached Imani. "State Attorney Vale, how do you feel about the court's decision today?" Before Imani could answer, a shriek cut through the air. Lena burst through the courthouse doors, her face twisted with fury. "This street was peaceful before your kind moved in," she screamed, spittle flying from her mouth. "You think your fancy title changes what you are?" The crowd parted as Lena charged down the steps toward Imani, hands outstretched like claws. "You don't belong here. You never will." Two deputies reacted instantly, intercepting Lena before she could reach Imani. They seized her arms, restraining her as she thrashed and continued screaming. "Get your hands off me! Do you know who I am? I'm the victim here." The cameras captured everything: Lena's contorted face, her racist tirade, the deputies firmly securing her wrists with handcuffs. Neighbors who had once believed her performance watched in shocked silence. Nia stood beside her mother, phone recording steadily in her hand. She leaned close to Imani and whispered, "Look at that. It's completely flipped." Imani nodded, understanding exactly what her daughter meant. The image had reversed perfectly. This time, the true aggressor was being publicly removed, while the family she had targeted stood dignified and unbowed. As Lena was placed in the back of a patrol car, still screaming about invasion and betrayal, Mrs. Daniels approached the Vales with tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry we didn't speak up sooner," she said softly. "We were afraid of her for so long." Elias put his arm around Imani's shoulders. "It's over now." But Imani knew better. This wasn't just an ending. It was accountability made visible for everyone to witness. That same evening, only hours after the courthouse scene, the Vales pulled into their driveway. The car was quiet. No one had spoken much on the drive home. Victory felt strange, like waking from a nightmare to find the sun already high in the sky. Imani clutched the manila folder containing court orders, protection documents, and official papers. She stared at their house, remembering how alien it had felt just weeks ago with police lights flashing across the windows. "We're home," she said simply. Elias turned off the engine. "And this time, it really feels like it." As they walked up the path, Nia pointed to something on the porch. A basket sat by the front door, wrapped in cellophane with a blue ribbon. "What's that?" Elias asked, immediately suspicious after everything they'd endured. Nia approached it cautiously and read the attached card. "It's from the Wilsons next door. Welcome to the neighborhood. We're sorry it took so long." Inside the basket were fresh muffins, local coffee, and a handwritten note expressing shame for staying silent. They had barely settled inside when Imani's phone rang. It was the county commissioner's office. "State Attorney Vale, I wanted to inform you personally that the ethics complaint has been dismissed entirely," the voice said. The committee found no evidence of misconduct whatsoever. Your position is secure, and frankly, the board wishes to express regret for how this matter was handled. Imani sat down heavily on the couch. Thank you for letting me know. There's more, the commissioner continued. The board is interested in your perspective on how emergency services respond to potentially discriminatory calls. We'd like you to consider heading a county initiative on the matter. After she hung up, Imani shared the news with her family. Nia whooped and threw her arms around her mother's neck. They can't touch you now, she said fiercely. A knock at the door interrupted their celebration. Elias tensed from habit, but when he looked through the peephole, he saw Mrs. Daniels holding a covered dish. I made chicken casserole, she said awkwardly when he opened the door. I know it's not much, but... Her eyes were red-rimmed. I should have said something weeks ago. I saw her moving your packages. I saw her rehearsing those fake panic calls. Come in, Imani said, joining them at the door. More neighbors arrived as the evening progressed. Some brought food, others just came with apologies. Mr. Patterson from across the street admitted he'd turned over his doorbell camera footage to investigators after the break-in. I was scared of her, he confessed. She knew things about everyone, used it to keep us quiet. Outside, a white van pulled up. Two workers in county uniforms got out and approached Lena's house with ladders and tools. The Vales and several neighbors watched from the front yard as the men systematically removed each camera Lena had installed. One by one, the electronic eyes that had tracked the family's every move were disconnected and taken down. Court order, one worker explained when he noticed their attention. All surveillance equipment is to be removed immediately. Elias smiled for what felt like the first time in months. Now that's what I call visible justice. A locksmith arrived soon after, sent by the Victim Services Office. Emergency Restitution Fund, he explained, showing Elias the paperwork. New locks for every door, security reinforcement for the windows, all covered. As he worked, more neighbors gathered in the front yards. Children who had been kept inside during the tensions now played on the sidewalks. Adults who had barely made eye contact now stood together in small groups, talking openly. Nia sat on the porch steps, scrolling through her phone. Suddenly, she burst out laughing. A bright, genuine sound that had been absent from the house for too long. What's so funny? Imani asked, joining her. The local news, Nia said, turning her phone around. They're calling it a deliberate campaign of harassment and intimidation. Not neighbor dispute. Not misunderstanding. They got it exactly right. As sunset painted the street in warm orange light, someone brought out folding chairs. Someone else brought a cooler with drinks. What had started as awkward individual apologies transformed into an impromptu gathering spread across front yards that weeks ago had been a battleground. Terrence Bloom appeared with his wife, nodding respectfully to Imani. Truth has a way of coming out eventually, he said. I just wish it hadn't taken so long. A neighbor asked Imani if she wanted to say something. The group quieted as she stood. Thank you for being here, she began, her voice steady and clear. For weeks, we lived with a kind of pressure that wore us down day by day. Not just the harassment, but the silence around it. She looked at the faces surrounding her. Peace without dignity was never peace at all. And silence only protects cruelty. Heads nodded in solemn agreement. But tonight, she continued, I see something different. I see a community that can face uncomfortable truths and still come together. That's the kind of neighborhood we wanted to join when we moved here. Across the street, Lena's house sat dark and empty, stripped of its cameras and power. A small official notice was already posted on the door, the first step in asset seizure proceedings related to the reopened financial investigation. As night fell completely, the gathering continued under porch lights. Children rode bikes up and down the sidewalk, laughing and calling to each other. Cars passed with windows down and music playing. And for the first time since the Vales had moved in, no one called the police. No flashing lights interrupted the evening. No accusations shattered the peace. Elias stood beside Imani on their front porch, watching Nia chat with some younger neighbors. "I keep waiting for another knock on the door," he admitted quietly, "for those lights to come around the corner." Imani squeezed his hand. "They won't. Not tonight." The street had turned itself inside out, revealing a different community than the one that had first watched them through curtains. Lena's darkness had been swept away, leaving room for something better to grow in its place. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.